Meanwhile, there are a number of bills on the table in Congress aimed to protect voting rights. That's one of President Biden's main priorities. Two of those are the For the People Act that I just mentioned and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And here to break that down for us is Brown University political science professor Dr. Jonathan Collins. Dr. Collins, welcome back to BNC.
Oh, thank you, Brittany. It's a pleasure.
It's always good to have you with us. So, Dr. Collins, we want to break this down. As I just said, we keep hearing about both of these bills, why some folks support them and why some don't. But let's get a better understanding of them both. What's the difference between the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act?
Well, when you talk about what's going on with these two bills, they're very complementary, but they have distinct differences. And so when it comes to the John Lewis Act, for instance, the big word here is pre-clearance, federal pre-clearance. Think about it in this way. Let's say, you have a job and your employer is putting restrictions on things that make it more difficult for you to go to work. You have a manager that's making it very difficult for you to get to work. And you need some sort of protection lifted to make it easier for you to do your job. In the job instance, your corporation would come in and say, like the corporate office would come in and say, well, let's put restrictions on what this manager can do that might make it more difficult for you to get to work. The John Lewis Act is doing a similar thing with federal preclearance. So anytime states are looking to do things that change their election laws, what this John Lewis Act would do is it would require that the state has to get federal preclearance in order to make any significant changes. What's happening in the For the People Act is quite different. Here, the federal government is saying, look, these are the mandated things that your state has to do in order to continue to hold elections. So we have to, for instance, implement something like same-day registration, something that's been proven to increase voter turnout by on average about 5%. And this is something that doesn't require the monitoring that happens in the John Lewis Act. This is a very aggressive bill. So, again, both are very complementary, one oversight and then one mandatory action. And I think we need them both in place.
Yeah, and that's what folks say. They're not interchangeable, so they're both needed. But Democrat Senator Joe Manchin says the For the People Act is, quote, too partisan, and that congressional action on federal rights legislation must be the result of both Dems and the GOP coming together to find a pathway forward. He supports the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Why support one and not the other?
Well, that raises questions about the provisions in the For the People Act that might, I guess, evoke some sort of partisan divides. Let's break it down and see what might make Republicans skeptical. The big question here, honestly, is the dark money in politics. One of the big differences between the For the People Act versus the John Lewis Act is a big dent is being placed on campaign finance reform. And so what's happening in the For the People Act, now folks who are sending money through super PACs, that money has to be disclosed. The federal government is also providing matching funds that states can take advantage of for candidates who are running in low funded elections. So again, the big difference here is what we're doing to campaign finance reform, making it easier for folks with low levels of money to have a say in the elections, and honestly, taking away a lot of power from the big money in politics. And it just makes you wonder, well, if Senator Manchin has an issue with the differences between the bills, this is the one glaring issue and discrepancy that comes out to me, and we have to wonder where he falls on this particular provision within the bill.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of transparency needed as well. So, Dr. Collins, how does passing either one of the bills push against new voting restrictions that Republicans have put in place across the nation, basically to fight voter suppression?
Well, they help tremendously. I'll start with the John Lewis Act here, and what it does is it sort of reauthorizes the federal courts to step in and begin to piece by piece attack some of the new laws that states have been passing to make it more difficult for folks to vote, and especially given the fact that we've seen most of these provisions happen in southern states with large percentages of Black folks living inside the state. And so having aggressive federal courts, look, this was the pathway that got us from, the civil rights movement to expanded voter rights, was empowering the courts to play a significant role happening alongside, the marching in the streets. So restoring the power of the courts is going to be extremely important. Now, on the other end, the For the People Act, what this does is put in measures that we know work, measures that are proven to increase voter turnout and proven to make the ballot more accessible, particularly to folks who come from communities that are underserved. So again, same-day voter registration, the ethics clause, which requires that voters that the candidates release their taxes statements. Things like the not just the same day registration, but the pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Anytime you file a federal document, essentially you become registered to vote. Automatic registration, things that make it automatically easier for folks to vote. That's what's in the For the People Act, and that's very important.
Well, we know that Majority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, plans to bring that forward for a vote by the end of June. I guess we got to wait and see what happens with both of those bills. Dr. Jonathan Collins, as always, we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. And coming up, she was the first woman to be elected as vice president, and now she is the first sitting president to march with pride. The story behind the VP's surprise appearance at Freedom Plaza is next.